Oh, did nobody tell you? You're not on the list, sweetie.
Ma'am, are you Mrs. Renata Cole?
The day Renata Cole found out her marriage was a stage set was the day she boarded her own flight and realized she was the only one who didn't know the script. Stories like this don't just happen. They're built slowly, in the small silences at dinner, in the phone that's suddenly always face down, in the business trip that gets extended by one more night, and then another. By the time the truth arrives, it never feels sudden. It feels like the last domino in a line you never noticed falling. I want to tell you about the week my life folded in on itself, and about the 12 minutes on a private jet that changed how I understood my own marriage, and myself. My name is Renata. I was 38 years old, and for 11 years I had been married to a man named Desmond Cole, a commercial real estate developer who built his fortune converting old warehouses into luxury urban lofts, in cities that were gentrifying faster than anyone wanted to admit. Desmond was charming in that specific way. Successful men learned to be. He remembered the names of waiters. He tipped generously in front of people. He had a laugh that filled a room. I used to love that laugh. By the end, I flinched at it, because I'd learned it was a performance he could switch on for anyone, including me. We didn't start rich. We started in a one-bedroom apartment, above a laundromat, in a city I won't name, eating rice and beans 4 nights a week, while Desmond drove to construction sites at 5 in the morning, and I worked the reception desk at a dental office, going to school part-time, for a business degree I eventually used to run the back office of his company. I built his invoicing system. I chased down his late payments. I sat across from bank loan officers with him, in the same navy blazer 3 years running, because we couldn't afford another one, and I smiled and nodded, and made him look stable enough to lend to. I tell you this not for sympathy, but because you need to understand. I didn't marry a rich man. I built one. The cracks started 2 years ago, though I didn't call them cracks at the time. I called them stress. Desmond had just closed on a development downtown, the biggest deal of his career, and something in him changed the moment the money landed. He started disappearing for stretches he called site visits, that somehow never had photos to show for them. He bought a chain of thin gold bracelets he claimed were a business gift for an investor's wife. He got a new cologne, small things, the kind of things a woman notices and then argues herself out of noticing, because the alternative is too enormous to hold. I found out about Vanessa Reyes by accident, the way most wives do. I was picking up his suit from the dry cleaner. He'd asked me to, said he needed it for a closing dinner that Thursday, and the receipt in the jacket pocket wasn't from a restaurant. It was from a jewelry store 3 towns over, dated 2 weeks earlier, for a pair of diamond earrings. I hadn't gotten diamond earrings. I hadn't gotten anything that year, except a card on our anniversary that he'd clearly bought at the airport, because the price sticker was still on the back. An airport gift shop in Miami, a city he'd told me he never visited. I didn't confront him right away. This is the part people don't understand about betrayal. It doesn't make you reckless. It makes you very, very quiet. I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention to his invoices, looking for the discrepancy, the number that didn't add up. And once you start looking at a person like a ledger instead of a husband, you find every error. Her name, I learned eventually, was Vanessa Reyes, 29 years old, a former marketing consultant for one of Desmond's projects 2 years back, the downtown conversion, the one that made him rich. She was beautiful, in the effortless, expensive way that takes money to look effortless. She had over 60,000 followers on social media, mostly for posting outfits and airport lounges, and if you scrolled back far enough, I did, more nights than I'll admit, you could watch her life quietly intersect with my husband's business trips. A coffee cup from a hotel in Dallas, the same week Desmond was in Dallas. A sunset photo from a rooftop bar in Austin, the same week he was in Austin. No service, don't worry if I'm quiet. I didn't say anything for 4 months. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect the wronged wife to explode the moment she suspects. I didn't explode. I gathered. I made copies of financial statements. I quietly opened a separate account and moved a portion of my own salary from the company into it every month, calling it emergency savings, which was true, just not in the way he would have assumed. I started talking to a lawyer named Priscilla Okafor on my lunch breaks, in the parking garage of my own office building, engine running, doors locked, like I was the one doing something wrong. Then came the trip. Desmond announced it on a Tuesday, standing in our kitchen with his laptop open, not quite looking at me. "Big opportunity," he said. "The NA group wants to talk about the coastal project, but they want to do it face-to-face, on the plane, on the way to the meeting. It's a whole experience thing. They fly potential partners out on the private jet, wine and dine, close the deal in the air. I need you there. Optics matter. They like family men." I remember the specific relief I felt hearing that. He wants me there. Some small, stupid, hopeful part of me, the part that still remembered the laundromat apartment and the navy blazer, thought maybe this was a turning point. Maybe the affair, if that's even what it still was ending. Maybe he was choosing his marriage the way he used to choose it, back when choosing me was the whole plan. "Of course," I said. "Send me the flight details." He did. Thursday, 7:45 a.m., a private terminal I'd never flown out of, a jet chartered under the name of the client's company. I remember standing in my closet the night before, trying on 3 different outfits, settling finally on something simple: dark jeans, a white top, a striped button-down over it, because the plane would probably be cold, low-block heels, because I'd read somewhere that a private jet cabin is small, and you don't want to be tottering around in stilettos. I wanted to look like a partner. Not a trophy, a partner, the woman who built the ledger. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was nerves about the deal. The morning of the flight, Desmond left the house before me. "Have to grab something from the office. Meet you at the terminal." Which should have been my first warning, because in 11 years of marriage, Desmond Cole had never once beaten me anywhere. He was chronically, aggressively late. He missed the birth announcement dinner for his own nephew because he lost track of time. But that morning, he was gone before I'd finished my coffee. I drove myself to the private terminal. The woman at the check-in desk, mid-50s, kind eyes, a laminated badge that said concierge, looked at my name, looked at her screen, and hesitated, in a way that made my stomach drop before I understood why. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said. "I don't see a Renata Cole on this manifest." "There has to be a mistake," I said. "My husband arranged this." "Desmond Cole. It's for the NA group meeting," she typed. She frowned. She typed again, and then she turned the screen slightly. Not enough to be unprofessional, but enough. A habit, I think, of someone who has delivered this particular kind of news before and learned that some women need to see it themselves to believe it. 2 names on the manifest: Desmond Cole, Vanessa Reyes. I want to tell you I made a scene. I didn't. Something in me went very still and very cold, the same stillness that had let me quietly build a separate savings account for 4 months without telling him. I asked the concierge, very calmly, whether there was another flight that morning to the same destination. There was. A commercial red-eye connection that would get me there 6 hours later, coach, middle seat. I booked it. I paid for it myself, on the card that was only in my name. And then, because some invisible thread of dignity in me refused to simply disappear quietly into a parking garage and cry, I asked the concierge one more question. Could she confirm which gate the private jet was departing from? I told her I'd forgotten to give my husband something. It was a lie. I didn't know yet what I was walking toward. I only knew I needed to see it with my own eyes, the way I'd needed to see the jewelry receipt, the way I needed the screen turned toward me instead of away. I walked down that gleaming private corridor with my boarding pass, for a different, humbler flight, clutched in my hand like a ticket to my own execution. And there, through the open door of the jet, I saw them. Desmond, reclined, laughing, one arm slung along the back of a cream leather seat. And beside him, legs crossed, a glass of champagne somehow already in her hand at 8 in the morning, wearing a red silk wrap dress that cost, I would learn later, more than my first car. Vanessa Reyes, mid-laugh, lifting one hand toward me in a gesture so deliberately, casually cruel, that for a moment, I genuinely could not process what I was looking at. She saw me standing in the aisle. She knew exactly who I was. I found out later she'd looked me up months ago, studied my photos, memorized my face the way you study an opponent, not a stranger, and she smiled, slow and satisfied, and raised her middle finger at me like it was nothing, like I was nothing. Like 11 years and a navy blazer and 1,000 mornings at that dental office reception desk were nothing. Desmond didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced, like I was an appointment he'd forgotten to cancel. "Renata," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, it's not what you're picturing. This is a work thing. Vanessa's consulting on the... Save it, I said. My voice didn't shake. I remember being surprised by that. I turned to leave. I had already decided, in that instant, that I would not give either of them the show they clearly wanted. I would take my coach seat on my red-eye connection, and I would let my lawyer, Priscilla, handle the rest of it from a position of cold, documented advantage, because I had 4 months of receipts and screenshots and financial statements that Desmond didn't know existed. And that's when a voice stopped me. Calm, formal, entirely unexpected. "Ma'am?" I turned. A man in a captain's uniform, 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, stood just outside the cockpit door, holding a tablet, looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. "Ma'am," he said again. "Are you Mrs. Renata Cole?" Every head in that cabin turned. Desmond's face went the color of the leather seats. Vanessa's raised hand, still frozen mid-gesture, slowly lowered. "Yes," I said carefully. "Why?" The pilot glanced down at his tablet, then back up at me, and said the sentence that would unravel everything I thought I understood about that morning, about my husband, about the 11 years behind me, and about exactly whose name this flight, this jet, and this entire deal had actually been booked under. "Ma'am, I think there's something you need to see before we push back from the gate." The captain didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In a cabin that small, everyone heard him. Desmond, frozen with his arms still draped along the seat back, like a man in a photograph he no longer recognized. Vanessa, her champagne glass forgotten, condensation sliding down onto the cream leather, and me, standing in the aisle in my sensible flats, still holding the boarding pass for my coach seat like it was a shield. "There's a discrepancy in the charter paperwork," the captain said. "I'd rather not discuss it in front of the other passengers. Would you step forward with me, ma'am?" I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt exposed, the way you feel when a doctor pulls you aside after a routine scan and says the word concerning. Something was happening that I hadn't orchestrated, and after months of being the only one in my marriage who understood what was really going on, that loss of control frightened me more than Vanessa's raised middle finger ever could. I followed him to the galley, just out of earshot, though I could still see Desmond twisting in his seat, straining to watch us, his composure cracking at the edges like old paint. The captain turned his tablet toward me. "This charter was booked under Cole Development Group's corporate account," he said. "Standard for business travel. Nothing unusual there." "But the account holder listed for billing authorization isn't your husband. It's you." I stared at the screen. He was right. 3 years ago, when Desmond's company was young enough that every dollar mattered and old enough that we needed to look established for lenders, I had restructured our finances myself. I'd made myself the primary signatory on the corporate accounts because Desmond was reckless with money, in a way that terrified me back then. He'd almost lost us the warehouse deal by overspending on a launch party before we'd even broken ground. I'd quietly made myself the last line of defense. He'd let me, gratefully, at the time, and then, as the money grew, he'd apparently forgotten I was still there. "Any charter over a certain dollar amount on this account triggers a manual authorization flag," the captain continued. "It usually gets rubber-stamped by an assistant who doesn't know the difference. But this morning, the flag actually got reviewed, and it came back to your name, not his. Legally, ma'am, you're the one who has to approve this flight before we can push back." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Somewhere behind me, I heard Vanessa's voice, thin and irritated. "Is there a problem?" "We have a meeting." I looked past the captain's shoulder at my husband. Desmond had gotten up now, was walking toward us with the particular fast, controlled panic of a man, trying not to look panicked. "Renata," he said quietly, "whatever this is, we can sort it out later. Just approve it. Please. This deal is worth $11 million. I need this." And there it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "this looks bad, but let me explain." Just approve it. As if I were still the reception desk, the invoicing system, the woman in the navy blazer who made him look stable enough to lend to. As if 11 years of partnership had quietly been rewritten, in his mind, into a service contract. I thought about the 4 months of quiet gathering, the separate account, the lawyer in the parking garage. I thought about the diamond earrings I never got, and the anniversary card with the airport price tag still stuck to the back. And I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, That I was done being the invisible signature at the bottom of Desmond Cole's life. No, I said. The word came out smaller than I expected, but it landed like a dropped glass. No? Desmond repeated, like I'd spoken another language. I'm not authorizing this flight, I said, louder now, steady. Not with her on it. Not on my account. Vanessa stood up so fast her champagne glass tipped and rolled off the little side table, spilling gold across the cream carpet, a small, ugly stain in an otherwise pristine cabin. This is insane, she said. Desmond, tell her. Tell me what? I said, and I finally turned to look at her directly. Really look at her. For the first time since I'd walked down that gleaming corridor. That you're consulting. On what, exactly? Because I've read your posts, Vanessa. I know which hotels you were in, the same weeks he told me he was in Dallas, and Austin with no service. I know about the earrings. I've known for 4 months. I just didn't know you'd be stupid enough to fly on a jet, chartered under my name. The color drained out of her face in a way that told me everything she hadn't known. Desmond had let her believe this trip was clean, that the money behind it was purely his, that she was stepping into a lifestyle he'd built alone. Watching her realize, in real time, that she was standing in a cabin, bought and paid for by the wife she'd flipped off 20 minutes earlier. That was its own quiet justice, and I let myself have it. Desmond's jaw tightened. Renata, don't do this here. Not in front of... In front of who? I said. Your mistress? Your business partners? The pilot? Desmond, you did this in front of everyone the second you put her name on a manifest under my account and let her flip me off in an aisle like I was staff. The captain, to his credit, had already stepped back, tablet in hand, giving us the smallest sliver of privacy a small cabin allows. Ma'am, he said gently, I need a decision. We have a departure window. I looked at Desmond one more time, really looked. The way you look at a photograph of someone you used to love, cataloging the face for evidence rather than affection. And I said the sentence I'd been quietly rehearsing in the back of my mind for 4 months without knowing it. Take the jet off my account. Put it on his personal card, if he even has the credit for it, without me co-signing. And get my bag off this plane. I have a connecting flight to catch, coach, middle seat, on my card, to a business meeting that, as of this morning, no longer includes my husband, because I own 30% of Cole Development Group, and I intend to be in that room. That last part wasn't something Desmond knew. 3 years ago, when I restructured the finances, I hadn't just made myself the signatory. I'd taken equity instead of a salary increase, on my lawyer cousin's advice, back when the company was worth a fraction of what it is now. Desmond had signed the paperwork without reading it closely, eager to save cash flow at the time. He'd forgotten. I hadn't. I watched that information land on his face like a physical blow. I'm not going to walk you through every hour of the following weeks in detail, because grief, and make no mistake, even righteous grief, is still grief, doesn't move in a straight line. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor of the house I'd co-owned since before it was worth anything, crying in a way I hadn't let myself cry since my mother passed. There were mornings I woke up and, for 3 or 4 confused seconds, reached for the version of my marriage that no longer existed, the one where Desmond's laugh still meant something good. But I also want to tell you what happened in that meeting room, 6 hours later, when I walked in, alone, in the same striped button-down and jeans I'd worn onto that jet, because I refused to let this become about my outfit, and sat down across from the Thai group's negotiating team. They already knew who I was. Priscilla, my lawyer, had made a single phone call while I was on my connecting flight, informing them, professionally and without drama, that any agreement involving Cole Development Group would require sign-off from a 30% equity holder, and that said equity holder had concerns about the current leadership's judgment that the EC Group would want to hear directly. Desmond arrived 40 minutes late, alone. Vanessa, I later learned, had been put on a commercial flight home by the captain's staff, her bags removed from the jet along with mine, her name struck from every future manifest associated with the company. She never worked with Cole Development Group again. Word travels fast in small industries, and she got a man's marriage exposed on a chartered jet is not the kind of story that helps a marketing consultant's client list. Desmond tried, in that meeting, to project the same easy charm that had once gotten us bank loans on the strength of a rehearsed smile. But charm doesn't survive contact with documentation, and I had documentation. 4 months of it. Financial discrepancies. A pattern of expensed client dinners that matched, almost to the day, with Vanessa's social media check-ins, an equity stake he'd forgotten existed, sitting quietly in a filing cabinet, worth considerably more than he was prepared for anyone to remember. The Tree Group didn't walk away from the deal, but they restructured it, with me, not him, as their primary point of contact for the next 18 months, given recent instability in company leadership, as their lead negotiator put it, with the particular diplomatic cruelty of people who deal in money for a living. The divorce took 11 months. Priscilla was, in the end, worth every dollar and every parking garage lunch break. I kept the equity. I kept the house, the one above what used to be a laundromat's neighborhood, now unrecognizable, gentrified into the very kind of loft building Desmond had once built his fortune converting. I kept my name. I never took his, actually. A small stubbornness from 29-year-old me that turned out, in the end, to matter more than I ever expected it to. Desmond kept the company's day-to-day operations. Technically, though operations is generous, within 2 years, without my invoicing system, without my quiet correction of his impulsiveness, without the woman who'd spent a decade making him look stable enough to lend to, 2 of his projects fell behind schedule and over budget. I heard, secondhand, that he sold his stake in the coastal development 18 months later, at a loss, to cover a shortfall no one had caught in time. There was no one left checking the ledger. I don't say that with satisfaction. Exactly. I say it because it's true, and because there's a lesson in it that took me a long time to understand. Some men mistake being served for being loved. They confuse the quiet, competent woman correcting their mistakes for a background feature of their success, rather than the reason for it. And when that woman finally stops correcting, stops signing, stops smiling in the navy blazer, the whole structure she was holding up in silence starts, slowly, to show its cracks. I think about that flight sometimes, not the humiliation of it, though I felt every ounce of that in real time, standing in the aisle with my coach boarding pass. I think instead about the captain's voice, calm and formal, cutting through a moment that was designed to make me small. "Ma'am, I think there's something you need to see." He was right. There was something I needed to see. Not just the paperwork, not just the manifest. I needed to see, finally and completely, that I had spent 11 years building a life I had never once been asked to actually live in, and that the moment I stopped asking for permission to matter in it, it stopped being able to survive without me. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it just hands you back the pen you didn't realize you'd stopped signing your own name with. If this story made you think differently about the quiet work some people do to hold a life together, the invisible labor nobody claps for until it's gone, let me know. I'd love to hear which part hit you hardest.